Well, I'm really excited to be here today. Reverend Kim and his family have been such great friends to my mom and our family, so it was especially humbling when he asked me to come here to speak with all of you. And so I thought I'd center my sermon or my message on a verse, 2 Corinthians 5:7. That's walk by faith, not by sight. And it's a real central theme in my life and in my family's life. And it really started with my dad. So my dad was a minister, and when he was around my age, around 30, a constant prayer, and I think most of you can relate to this, was, dear God, who am I going to marry? Who's going to be that woman in my life to stand next to me and to go through life with me? And so it was something that he often prayed about, and he had a dream one night. And in the dream, God came to him, and he showed him a picture of this girl. And the girl was standing by a tree, and he said, this is the girl you're supposed to marry. So obviously, that image was burned in his brain because that's supposed to be his wife, right? Well, during that time, he would go on visitations to pray for families. And in those days, a lot of families, Korean families, would always bring out their photo album to share their pictures so that he would have an understanding of who their family was so that when he prayed for them, he could be a little bit more connected. Well, imagine his surprise when he opens up the photo album and there's the picture from his dream. That girl standing by the tree. He looks up and the girl sitting next to him is the girl in the picture. So overcome with emotion, he looks at her, granted the first time he's ever met this girl, and he says, God told me in my dream, we are supposed to get married. You are supposed to be my wife. And she looks at him and she says, you're crazy. I don't even know you. Get away from me. I'm going to get a restraining order. This is terrible. So obviously he left, and he was really humiliated and embarrassed because he had prayed and he had listened to God, and then God had allowed that to happen. So his mentor, who would come back from Korea each summer, kept bothering him, and I get this all the time, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? And so he was pretty irked at that point, and he said, you know what, if you want me to get married, why don't you go find me a wife? So the next summer when he came back, he said, I found you a wife. Here's her picture. She's in Korea. Why don't you go fly and meet her and her family? So he's on the plane, and he's praying, and he says, dear God, I was so faithful the last time you gave me that message, but it was too humiliating for me. And so this time, if I'm supposed to marry this girl, let her have the dream, not me. So he goes, he meets this girl in Korea, and they do not get along at all. It is not going well. They're walking in the park, and he decides that he's just going to end it. But they're making some small talk, and he says, so, when's the first time that you heard about me? And she said, oh, in a dream. So he gets a little flustered and he tells her the story, but he's not convinced that she's the one. And so he shares that his birthday is December 12th. And she starts laughing. And she says, you know what, my neighbor had a dream, and she said she got an invitation for me for my wedding for December 12th. And all these things started happening one after another, and they couldn't deny that it was God's will for them to get married. So after 9 days, my mom and dad got married. How crazy is that, right? And so this is when Walk by Faith really started in our life, because it's a testament to how they met. And growing up, it was really easy to get behind this message, right? You walk by faith, God introduces you to your soulmate in 9 days. You walk by faith, you have this wonderful family and this wonderful life. So it was very easy for me to understand this message. I would say my very first lesson in Walk by Faith came when I was in 8th grade. I was sitting in a parent-teacher conference with my mom, and my brother called. He knew we were in the conference, so my mom was a little embarrassed, and she ignores the call. A minute later, he calls again. She ignores, he calls again. So finally, she answers the phone, and she says, what's going on? And he said, you know, Dad fell. He collapsed in the bathroom, and so the paramedics are here. So we rushed home, and they took him to the hospital, and they found out through an MRI that he had some water around his lungs. And that's not too serious of a diagnosis. They usually just go in, they go in, they take the water out, and the person's fine. But because he fell in the bathroom, they decided that they wanted to do some CT scans to see if he had any brain trauma or fractures in his neck or anything like that. So he goes into the CT scan and he begins to have seizures. And they find out that it's not water around his lungs, it's actually blood. And an hour and a half later, he's gone. And he died of a heart aneurysm. So we go home that night, and it all happened so quickly. My brother and I were with my mom in her room, and we're sitting on the floor, and we're crying, and we're shocked. And we looked at her and we said, what are we gonna do? You know, it happened so quickly. How are we gonna get through this? How are we gonna do it without Dad? And with so much courage, she looked at us and she said, we're gonna get through it. We're gonna be okay because we're gonna walk by faith. And for the first time, that verse and that phrase was so scary and so uncertain. You know, my dad's big dream for me was to be an Olympic champion. We talk about it all the time, you know. We'd have a million conversations on the drive to the gym, just how he really wanted that for me. And so after he passed away, I wrote him a letter, and I promised him that I would get there, that I would do everything in my power to train as much as I could and dedicate my life to making this dream come true for us. So I didn't do a normal high school career. I did some homeschool, I did regular school, I did independent study, junior college, to try to focus on training, and I would go for 5 days a week for 6 hours every single day. And things were looking pretty good. I made the national team, and then I got to represent the United States on the world team, was able to win a medal, and then I even earned a spot at the Olympic trials. And it was right here in Anaheim. The Honda Center, at the time was called the Anaheim Pond. That's where the competition was. And so my whole family and all my friends, they got to come watch me. And I truly believed that it was God's plan for my life to allow me to go to the Olympics. I felt like I deserved it because he had taken away so much from me that this was the moment where I could make the Olympics, I could share the story and share his glory through that moment. So I competed at the Olympic trials, best meet of my life. I hit all of my events and I finished 4th. And top 6 make the Olympic team. So there was one more step, this camp that I had to go to before it was all set in stone. So the very next day in practice, I'm feeling really good, excited. I have 1 week left before the Olympic team is announced, and I'm tumbling, and I feel my foot give out. And in the middle of the air, I realize that I ruptured my Achilles. So I can show you guys the scar. So they do the test where they squeeze your calf like this, and usually your foot will move. Mine didn't move at all. And so I knew in that moment that my Olympic dream was over. And I felt really alone in that moment. Like nobody could even fathom to understand the confusion and the pain that I was feeling. And so as my coaches carried me into the car, I had to put my foot out like this, and I slid back into the back seat. And as the door was closing, my brother ran out of the gym. And we looked at each other and we both started crying. Because he knew exactly how I was feeling in that moment. Because my brother and I were like best friends. So when I look at him, he doesn't have to say a word and I know exactly what he's thinking, right? Before he does anything, I already know what he's gonna do. That's the kind of relationship I have with my brother. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about because I used to teach high school science and my students used to come up to me and they'd say, hey miss, this is my bae, right? Or this is my wifey, or we got a bromance going on. It's that person in your life. Your very best friend who you know like the back of your hand. Well, I don't know about you guys, but that's the type of relationship that I want to have with God. I wanted him to be my best friend because I was so confused about where my life was going. I wanted to know what he wanted for my life. So I was like, how do you do that? How do you create that type of relationship with him? And it occurred to me, it's just the same way that you do it with your best friend. You invite him into your life. When you need advice, you ask him. When something great happens in the day and you're celebrating, you share it with him. When something's really tough, you share that with him too. You go through life together, the ups and the downs, and you do that with prayer. I really think that prayer is like your text message, it's your Snapchat, it's your FaceTime to God. And when I grew up, I always heard my way hominy praying, and it was this very formal thing, right? Hananim Abaji, Kamsahamnida, followed by like a 20-minute prayer. Well, I think that's good in certain circumstances, but what I learned is really you can have a more casual relationship with God where you just talk to him and you let him know what's going on in your mind and you wait to hear if he responds to you. And I used to think my mom was crazy because she'd tell me things like, oh, God told me that you're supposed to do this. Oh, God told me. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, God came down and he spoke to you? And it never made sense to me. But I can say that when I started thinking about it in these terms, things started happening. When I'd have a bad day, suddenly a Bible verse would pop into my head, or I'd randomly start singing a praise song, and the message kind of related to what I was going through, or a person would just magically appear in my life. And so the first time it happened, I was actually right after that clip that you just saw, I was getting on the plane and I was taking an online math class, calculus. And I was supposed to, keep up with all my work online, but I kind of cheated my way through it because, it's ABC, and so then I'd get them all wrong, but I'd memorize the answers and then I'd fill it in after. Well, your whole grade depended on, at the end of the year, you took a final. And I was not ready for that final exam. And so as I was getting on the plane, I was very worried about how I was gonna get in the school tomorrow and take this test. So I'm sitting on the plane, a little bit panicked, and I'm a pretty outgoing person, so there's a guy sitting next to me and he's Asian, so I'm like, oh, I'll just start talking to him. So I strike up a conversation, and it turns out he's a math professor. And so I couldn't believe the irony of it all, and I said, this has got to be God working in my life. And so I struck up a conversation with him, and I said, we got a 5-hour flight, I have a math final tomorrow, can you help me? And no joke, for 5 hours, he tutored me, he made worksheets for me, watched me do it all, I learned the material, and got an 89% on the final.
Oh.
Amazing. And the most amazing thing about it is if I had gotten a C in that class, which is what I probably deserved, I wouldn't have gotten into Stanford. So I have no idea who that math professor is, but I thank him daily in my prayers because he had a huge impact on my life. The next time I got one of these messages, I'd say, was when I was in Boston. I had just graduated from college, and I was working at a Starbucks because I wanted to teach. And so I taught part-time, and I thought, this is my way to make an impact on the world. And then I got a job at Starbucks because I said, this is a way for me to pay my bills. And so I was standing there one day, and a customer came in, and the way it works at Starbucks, when somebody comes in, you have to say, hi, welcome to Starbucks. How are you doing today? Usually everyone says, great, good. Well, today, this woman looked at me, and she said, horrible. I was kind of surprised because people usually aren't like that. And so I asked her, what's going on? And she said, I was trying this thing today. Have you heard of it? SAC, Simple Acts of Care and Kindness. Well, I was leaving my building and I decided to do that, so I held the door open for the person behind me. But he just brushed right past me, shoved me into the door, and I hurt my shoulder. And so that's what happens when you try to be a good person. And she was really upset. So I was heating up her scone, and I saw a few free samples that we had out, so I snuck them into her bag. And then I gave her to-go bag, and when she was leaving, she ran back to the counter, and she said, you messed up my order. My boss was standing pretty close by, so I told her, shh, I put those in there as a special surprise and gift for you. She stopped, and she said, why are you doing this for me? And I told her, I just wanted you to know that sometimes good things do happen to good people, so I really hope it turns your day around. And she started crying. And I think she must have been having a really hard time, and it was surprising to me that that one simple act had such a big impact on her. And it made me realize that it's not just teaching where I can make an impact. And for us in our daily life, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. God can use you to spread his love. The next time I had a message, it was not a message that I was so happy to get. I was sitting in a church in Boston, and honestly, I still clung on to this belief that God was going to give me this fairy tale ending, right? Everything was going to work out for me how I wanted. And the minister that day was sharing about Job. Do you guys know about Job? He's one of God's most faithful servants. And the devil told God that he was only faithful because God blessed him. And so God decided to start taking everything away from Job. He took away his house. He took away his 10 kids. He made him a leper so that he lost all his friends and was completely isolated from his community. And still, in that moment of distress, he said, God giveth and he taketh away. Praise the Lord. And so even in that moment, he still praised God. And since God was so pleased with this, he blessed Job double. Gave him twice as many houses, twice as much money, gave him 10 kids again. And I thought, yeah, that's me, right? I've been faithful. This is going to happen for me. I just have to wait for my time. And then the minister said, but it's important to remember, we're not all going to be like Job. God may not choose to bless you 2 times over on earth, because our blessing comes when we meet our Heavenly Father in heaven. And it hit me. I had been walking by faith this whole time, hoping for some earthly reward, and maybe that wasn't going to happen for me. And I had to be okay with that. So it's so much easier said than done, right? Walk by faith. Even if things don't go your way, that's okay. You just go with it. Because we want what we want, right? You want it your way. And you feel like you know best because it's your life. Well, this happened to me with my brother. He was working at the Clippers, and he was a video intern at the time. And he would literally wake up at 5 o'clock every morning to drive from Irvine to LA through all that traffic, and then he'd work all day and be the very last one to leave at midnight. And he was feeling really angry that day because as hard as he worked, as much as he did, he wasn't getting paid. He was volunteering. All the people at the Clippers organization were super rude to him, and they were not thankful and they weren't grateful for anything that he was doing. And so he ended the phone call with me and he said, you know what, all I wish today is that the Yankees win, because my day is so horrible. That's the one thing that I hope happens today. So when we got off the phone, I just started praying for the Yankees. I'm like, come on, God, he's having a terrible day. Just let the Yankees win. And I had heard that if you prayed very fervently, that God would listen to your prayer. So man, it seems silly, but I was like fervently praying. And I told God, I don't even know how to fervently pray, but that's what I'm doing right now, so please bless my brother. And the Yankees were leading the entire game, so I felt pretty good about it. In the 9th inning, on the last play, the other team hit a home run and they won. And I was so angry. Like, really? You couldn't do this one little thing for my brother? And I let God know how upset I was about this and how unfair and unjust it was. And then I'm scrolling through Instagram and I see this picture. And it's this little girl and she's holding a teddy bear. And God's standing in front of her and he says, give it to me. And she says, no, God, but I love it. And behind him, he's holding a teddy bear that's this big. But she can't see it. And I realized that if God was going to bless my brother, he wasn't going to bless him with a Yankees victory. He was going to bless him in his way. 2 weeks go by, and I get a phone call at work, and my brother's in hysterics. He was offered the head video coordinator position for the Portland Trail Blazers. Now, I could have a whole separate message about my brother and his journey to the NBA, but this does not happen. Usually people serve their time 5 years as an intern before getting an opportunity. But because he worked so hard, the person who used to be the head video coordinator in Portland recommended him for the position. And so when we talked to him, he had talked about going to Philly or San Antonio, and here was Portland, out of the blue. And it became clear, God can bless you more than you could ever hope, dream, or imagine. And so if I think about all these stories that I've shared with you, I would say, walking by faith, sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's terrifying, full of fear, full of uncertainty. Sometimes God will bring someone to where you are to help you out. And other times, he'll use you right where you are to share his love with people around you. And still, he might take you somewhere full of obstacles and challenges, somewhere you do not want to be. And yet other times, he might take you to a place that's better than you can dream or imagine. So I can tell you, walking by faith, the one thing I guarantee, it will always be exciting.
Amen.
He will always have your back, and it will always lead you to the greatest reward that you'll receive in heaven. So how do we get started with this? How do we start walking by faith and going down this journey? Well, I think that focuses on the second part of this verse. Walk by faith, not by sight. So there's this picture that you can look up, and it's JFK. Do you guys know who JFK is? Former President of the United States. Did a lot with civil rights. And he's on the Air Force One, and he's walking down the steps of the plane. And you see his 3-year-old son running towards him. Really cute picture, right? Well, the true story is that after that picture was snapped, he comes down from the stairs, he opens his arms, and he kneels, waiting to embrace his son. And his son runs right past him to the plane. And I think this happens to us sometimes. God is standing right in front of us, with his arms open, and he's waiting to embrace you. And instead you run towards those earthly desires that you want, that you need to have. That phone, that girlfriend, that boyfriend, that college, those shoes. Let's change that. So when you're in that moment and the road in front of you looks really easy, or even when it feels scary, or when you don't know how God's going to use you, or who this person is that came into your life, or when it looks like there's nothing but challenges all around you, or even when you see nothing but great fortunes lying in front of you, choose to run towards him. Open your arms, embrace him, hold on to him as you walk through your journey, and choose to walk by faith and not by sight.